Hey everybody. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, but hopefully you're going to find it entertaining and fun. Today we're talking about rendering. So, what is rendering and how is it going to make our portraits look more realistic? So, what we're looking at right now is called Metahuman, and this is it's a program for video game designers, and I mean, take a look at this. Isn't this absolutely incredible? Well, actually, you may have two feelings. You might be like, this is incredible, or you might be like, this is terrifying. It looks so realistic, but no matter your opinion, it's out there. And I think this is something that we can use to help us with our portrait paintings. So, and this will clear up a little bit more as we get into it. A lot of this has to deal with the speed of my computer trying to look at this in real time. So you'll see as the video goes on, this is going to get even more clear for you to see. Okay, so what is rendering when it comes to portrait painting? Rendering really comes down to the level of detail that you add to your portrait paintings and what you decide to add in or what you decide to keep out. Now, you could go hyper detailed, and I know that there are a lot of portrait painters right now that really like to make a name for themselves as hyper realistic portrait painters, where they get every tiny little hair and detail and pore and pimple. But it's not always necessary. So we're going to be walking through times when it is necessary, times when it's not. And we're really just going to kind of walk through this with no real plan, just a conversation. Okay. So the first thing I think it's important to note to start the conversation is, when do you add an insane level of detail like we're seeing right now? So we can see at this moment as I'm changing the lighting, how not only does the detail change, but it's also going to blur things out. Like in this daytime, it's much more blurred out. And then there's times when the details on the face you could see them more clearly. And that is something important to note, lighting. So when you are standing this close to a person, which is pretty rare, this would be, very, very intimate. Then you're going to be able to see every single little hair. But usually we like to have our space around us. We usually have our little bubble around us where there's a distance. And when it comes to portrait painting, we either can break that and kind of move into the bubble, which in turn makes the viewer a part of that inner circle, kind of like what we're doing right now. It's so close, it's so intimate that it's slightly uncomfortable. And then there's sometimes when you are going to paint a person further away, where the details are really not going to be that important, maybe only in specific parts. Now, if you're painting a person far away, but you make every detail seen, like every strand of hair or every pore or every eyelash, and they're supposed to be far away, it's going to look jarring. It's going to look unrealistic. It's going to look cartoony and probably a little bit uncomfortable. The only time when you're going to see this level of detail is if you are very close. And really, that's it when you're this close. Okay. Now, canvas size is going to have a huge part of this. The time when you may be painting this level of detail is if your face of your portrait is massive. Maybe it's like an entire side of a building, right? Then the details are part of the character. The details are the character, and you have to decide which details you're going to detail and get super realistic and which ones you're going to fade out. Now, there's some tips and tricks that I can give you right now. If you want to make it appear, let's say you are painting a portrait on the side of a building, but you still want to give the illusion of depth, like as if things are moving back in space, and you want to force the perspective more than it actually is. Like, let's say we're looking at the sky right now and we're looking at his nose and his hairs. If you want him to look even more three-dimensional, as if he's popping off the page, get very detailed with like the top of his nose, the top of the hairs, like on his mustache. And then you can gently blur the sides and the back into the background to give it this almost warped perspective as if it's popping right off the page. And I know I talk in this course a lot, and you're going to hear it a lot when we do the portrait demonstrations, is that detail really does pull forward and blurriness does push back. So that's something that you can play with in your portrait paintings, even if you're working off a reference photo and the reference photo is showing you one thing. You as the artist get to choose how you're going to play with the detail. And as I said before, it is important to not keep every detail. Okay, so now that we're looking at this part right here, I think this is really interesting because this is kind of like, I like to call it like clay mode. I don't think that's what it is called, but basically they're getting rid of the color of the skin, but you can still see the color of the eyes. Now, what are you noticing about the eyes when you compare it to a monochromatic black and white grisaille, kind of like what we're doing with our underpaintings? The eyes and the teeth, which you'll see later, the eyes and the teeth are very yellow, very pink, gray. Like there's a lot more umbers and brown tones to it than you would ever imagine. As new portrait painters, we tend to make our eyes and our teeth too white. And if we add too much yellow or too much pink, we think we're doing something wrong. But in actuality, when you're adding your oranges and your reds to your skin, it's going to balance out that yellowness of the eyes and the teeth. Now, some exceptions to this rule are younger children, clear-eyed, beautiful babies, and toddlers have like the most beautiful clear eyes. But instead of maybe making them yellow or wanting to make them appear more visually white, then focus on the gray tones or some gray tones with bluish undertones, which actually helps enhance the whiteness of the eyes. These are things that you can play around with. Okay, so now that we're back with the color of the skin, one thing I wanted to point out is, I don't know if you recall when we were looking at the clay, it looks like clay because it appears to have a wetness to the skin without the color added. Okay, here we are back again. You can almost, it feels like it is sort of wet like clay. Like picture putting your hand on clay. When you're molding it, it has a wet feeling to it, similar to what that appeared to be. And the reason why is because when we think about skin, or when we think about painting skin, we often forget that our skin has oil on it. And we have these pores that are secreting oil. And because of that, we're going to be getting a unique type of glare or shine, like a little bit of a reflection in little spots. So I really do like to play with rendering, and not all the time. I used to over render. I'd spend too much time rendering my details and it wouldn't look good. Not in my opinion. Now that I've moved further along, I think that when you create details or you're creating your rendering, you really do kind of have to, what is that saying? Like a kid's glove kind of thing. Like you don't want to go too heavy handed on your details. It's almost better to leave it up to the imagination and let people fill in the gaps, and then pick a few specific details that you can render out and really focus on. But there are some things that I am noticing with beginner portrait painters, and that is you really do make a transition into from beginner portrait painting into more advanced portrait painting when you take the time to figure out what rendering would look like, not just paying attention to the details, but paying attention to the different like curves of the skin. I like to say like planes of the face, really, because beginner portrait painters like to think of everything more one-dimensional. And the more, like when you're looking at this, though, you're seeing that there are bumps on the bumps, right? Like not just talking about the pores, we're talking about even the curve of the skin. And those curves of the skin, they're there. And when you can start to point those out and say, how would I paint this? Then you're starting to think more like an advanced portrait painter. We're taking it a step further than just like, how am I going to get the basic highlights, midtones, and shadows? You're thinking, what is this little area right here? Like, let's see where the pointer is right now. In that area, we have tiny little in-between highlights, midtones, and shadows there. And as an advanced portrait painter, you're kind of blurring your eyes a bit and thinking about what that would look like. And you can use tools to help you see that if you have like, if your vision is, not where it used to be, maybe. I know that I'm one that definitely has some vision problems that I have to figure out ways to work through. And how I do that is I'll use tools kind of like this, Photoshop, Canva, whatever I can find really, to help me see those in-betweens, the planes within the planes. Because sometimes I think that it is hard when you don't know what you're looking for to see those subtleties. Okay. When it comes to skin color, it really does make a difference when you add your skin color later, whether you're painting in black and white or you're painting in a different monochrome color. When you're only focusing on your highlights, midtones, and shadows, you're really doing yourself a service by being able to render more advanced, I would say. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. It's because it can get overwhelming when you're focusing on everything at once, color, detail, rendering, planes, like everything. But if you start off basic and you're just putting the basic highlights, midtones, and shadows first, and you get those in, and then you maybe smooth them out. And then from there, you say, what's next? So the next question maybe is, when do I start rendering? When should I start rendering in my paintings? And that's, I think, a very important question to ask because the answer may surprise you. I actually began rendering my paintings before color glazing and after my underpainting. So what I mean by this is my underpainting is very loose. I just want to kind of get the basic shapes in there. And then once I do that, then you basically have your foundation, right? It's like the building of the house that we've talked about. From there, we're going to start to create the walls of the house. We're going to start shaping it a little bit more. And very similar to shaping a bust out of clay, a head out of clay, or, a portrait. At first, you're just kind of like slapping the shape together. And then later, you really are thinking about the tiny little things that make the person unique. So after I'm done with my underpainting and it's very loose, then I start to refine more. And what I really do mean by refine is that I'm not going to focus on the eye. I'm going to focus on the overall shape a little bit more. And some things to keep in mind that you'll see coming up as well is that people are not symmetrical completely. I mean, obviously, we have two eyes that are in a relatively same position, but because of the way our muscles and the way we talk and the way we squint and the way we, think about things, our muscles are being formed based on our facial expressions or on the way, just in general, the way we were born as well. And because they're not symmetrical, you really want it to, yes, think about both sides of the face, but also the subtleties of both sides of the face. Maybe your commission, like maybe you got a commission for a person and you're starting to notice that they smirk. Now, what does that smirk actually look like? What does it look like? Like, how does it affect their entire face, the left side, the right side? And what does it look like when their face is resting? And what does it look like when they are being serious? And facial expressions are a huge part of portrait painting because we can say so much just with a very slight squint of the eye, eyebrow, even like a lift of the cheek or the nose or the mouth. So these are little parts of rendering that also make a difference. Let's talk about pores real fast because I know that we talk about wrinkles in coming up, but pores I think are something that that can be fun or super frustrating. Should you add pores in your portrait painting? Number one, what is the size of your canvas? Are you working big? If you are, yeah, why not? Because the point of working big is to see it from far away, but then get excited when you can see the details up close. If you're working small, I guess it really depends on how small. So there's a painting that I did that's pretty small. I would say like 9x16 on like kind of at the angle that this guy is at. In the cheek that is closest to the viewer, you can see part of the pores. But then as it goes off into the distance, it blurs out and it kind of creates a forced perspective. And you can see on his nose as well, like some age spots, those freckles, like those types of things can all be done in glazing, your color glazing later. So for example, rendering can take place in 2 phases. So like the first phase might be the shape, and the second phase of rendering might be the color. So the shape I would still do in my at the tail end of my underpainting before I move on to the color glazing, just trying to make sure that the highlights, midtones, and shadows are in the right place. But the shape of a pore is different than the look of a age spot. So an age spot is going to cover the pore, but you're still going to see the texture of the skin underneath the age spot. So that's why when I do freckles, I don't add the freckles in when I'm doing my monochromatic underpainting. I do my freckles as a color glaze afterward. It's a very light, subtle, like brownish, reddish glaze. And when it lays over the texture of the surface of the skin, it looks super natural. It's really nice. So this is something that's kind of interesting too. So we have this man who, without his hair, does look very different, but we're noticing that in this very unique character, he has some scars, some pockmarks, and I'm only mentioning this because I think it's important to take your subject into consideration and their feelings as well. You may have somebody that has a scar, or you have someone that has like some, skin things that they might not be like, might not want you putting into a painting. Now, just because you can paint it doesn't mean that you should. Most of the time, your subject is going to want to look cool or beautiful. And you have to consider like those things when you're painting. How are you going to make them feel like themselves like a million bucks? How are you gonna make them feel like $1 million? And maybe this is something that you consult with at first. It's like, are there any, and just ask questions. Are there any insecurities about yourself that you may or may not want to include in your portrait? And they might be like, oh no, whatever. But in the back of your head, just put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, now, should I include this? Now, if it's something that is a scar, maybe that scar is part of their story and they want it to be seen. I mean, it's tough. It can be tricky sometimes. You almost have to, like when you're a portrait painter, it's almost like being a therapist at times, like you're trying to be sensitive to your clients, and you want them to feel good. You want them to see it and be like, wow, I can't, this is great. This is exactly how I remember that person, or this is what I feel like I look like, or wow, like that feels like me. And trying to make someone feel like them or look like them, or make someone else, like say you're painting a portrait of someone's grandmother, to feel like that person. You're capturing more than their appearance. You're capturing an overall essence and personality. And how do you capture that? Well, ask questions. Really, it does come down to a lot of like, what are some things you remember about your grandmother? What was she like when she was laughing? What was she like when she was yelling? Like what kind of details can you add in? Did she love to cook? She could always see her with I don't know, like a cooking utensil in her hand. Is that something we can add to the portrait painting? Those are also things that you can add in, render in as, questions that you can ask to make your portraits more, feel like them more, and even maybe more artistic or more abstract or more fun. Back to what we're looking at right now. Lighting is so important. So looking at daylight noon time is extremely harsh, and you can see the harsh shadows on his face, right? It also does blow out a lot of the skin details. Well, yes and no. Some of the details are extremely bright and visible. Then some of the details get blown out. But daylight is not a flattering lighting to be filming or taking pictures of your subject. If you get a reference photo that is taking place in daylight and it looks like there's going to be a lot of harsh shadows, maybe ask if you can get a new one, or if you could take your own photos, or if you can select from a photo of your choosing. Now, this is an interesting thing. Do you see the haloing? And I'm trying to point it out right now. I want to mention this briefly because we don't really talk a lot about backlight in this course, so I'm going to talk about it right now. When you have lighting coming from behind, you get like a haloing effect around the outside. And this is something that can be really cool. And it can also affect the overall look of the portrait as well. It makes it more the front, depending on daytime or nighttime. Like in this instance, because it's nighttime, his face is appearing more evenly lit. But if this were happening with the strong sunlight behind you, you get silhouette from behind. In this case, though, we get a really interesting, like, evenly lit front face, except for the fill and the spots and the lights that we have around. And I'm just going to finish that thought. But the haloing effect is something cool that you can do because you kind of blur out the hair and make it appear as though, I don't know, more natural, more fun, and give your surroundings and your portrait a unified look and feel. Okay, we're back into this. It looks like the end of like daylight, right? Right before the sun is about to set. And he's on top of a building. He looks pretty forlorn. Hopefully everything's okay. But here we are again with our clay texture. And you can really see the interesting reflections on the skin that a clay will kind of give because of the oily effects that skin, the properties that skin has. How can you paint that in your underpainting? How can you render that in your underpainting before you even begin your color glazes? I'm trying to give myself some cues right now versus, I already talked about this though. Blur. Oh, here's an interesting thing. Blur versus detail. Here's where that was opposite. The blur was in the foreground and the detail was opposite because of the way the light was shining on this, the skin. So something to, I know I talk about this in my composition course, but I don't think I talk about it very much in my portrait in this course, realistic portraits. But sunlight has, or bright light, I guess, has a really interesting way of bringing out details. So for instance, let's pretend that you are looking at this guy. And here's an arrow. You're looking at this guy. The lighting is shining and showing the details. Everything else that is kind of falling away is going to be blurred out more. And obviously there are, this isn't always true, but most of the time, like even if you're, let's say, looking at a landscape, and usually when you paint landscapes, as things move out into the distance, into the atmosphere, they get slightly more blurry and less detailed and colored. But let's pretend that a beam of sunlight is shining through the clouds and shining directly onto a part of a mountain. That part of the mountain's details is going to be clear as opposed to everything around it, even if it's further off into the distance. So you can play with lighting in a lot of different ways. And it's something to consider. Colored lighting, like what we're talking about right now. Oh, I see what I'm talking about. Lighting moving upwards as opposed to downwards. Okay, so this lighting is coming from under him because it's supposed to mimic a campfire setting. And it will create an entirely different look and effect to the under eyes and the cheekbones and the brow bone. It makes now check that out. So I think I'm going to go back and forth and show you the difference. Here's harsh light from above. Here is like a portrait, more evenly lit, and this is from underneath. So here we go. Under. And you can see, yep, there we go. That brow bone, how different it is from this. Look how harsh that shadow is there and how subtle the shadow is here. So how rendering really does come down to your lighting effects. and what your shadows are going to look like. A lot of that, most of that can be done in your highlights, midtones, shadows, your monochromatic painting. But some things you're just going to have to finish in your color glazing, and you're going to have to start to decipher those two things separately. What are the renderings that I have to do in my underpainting before moving on to color glazing? And what kind of renderings am I going to have to do in my color glazing that I can't do in my underpainting? Makeup. Makeup is tricky for a lot of people, but it's actually really simple. So when you're adding makeup to people, it's as if you're applying makeup to your portrait painting. Do it in colored glazes at the end. Don't focus on the makeup right away, because just as though like when you wash your face at night, you're going to see your clean face. That is what you need to be focusing on, is a clean portrait, just focusing on your monochromatic underpainting. And then later on, when it comes to adding your color glazes, add that lipstick on later. Start subtle too. Start very subtle, because it's nearly impossible to take the makeup off. And I'm saying makeup in quotes because really it's just glazes of transparent color. But here's an example, right? I hope I go back. It looks like I don't. Okay. But okay, so concealer, makeup in general really does help blur, mattify, and make the skin appear smoother. So if someone has high makeup and you're trying to look at you're trying to look at your reference photo without any color saturation, like completely desaturated, paint it smooth. Paint them how they want to be painted. And if they add a lot of detail, makeup to their eyes, focus your details on where they focus their makeup details. In portrait number 1, our model has heavy eye makeup. And when I see that, I know that that person loves playing up the eyes. So all of my details can be played up in the eyes, or any kind of jewelry or things that they feel very proud of, because that's something that they identify with at this moment in time. They may not always identify as that person. As you get older, you go through your phases, but you're capturing a moment in time, what that person is like in that moment of time. So try to play into what they are proud of, how they dress, how they wear their hair, jewelry, those kind of things, because that is capturing part of their essence. That is capturing something that is very hard to do. I think it's just hard to do sometimes when you're trying to capture a feeling just on a face alone, right? It's like wearing a uniform. If someone is coming in with a very specific outfit, that is helping tell the story of their character. Now, if they came in with like a school uniform, it's hard. It's harder to understand who that child, or I say child because I'm thinking about the students I used to teach. They all wore school uniforms. And sometimes it was hard to kind of figure out like what they were about, what they were into, what made them excited. Kind of wish that, I don't know, uniforms can be good too, I guess. But anyhow, here is another example of backlighting at nighttime. I think backlighting at nighttime, it can be really fun because you can still see what's going on the other side and still use that blur effect, like I'm showing you right here, to make it appear as though your background and your foreground, the subject matter, everything is kind of interacting with each other. Too often I see portraits, including my own, when I was starting off, where the separations are too much, where the foreground, middle ground, and background are like, oh, this is the foreground, this is the middle ground, like they're very separate. But sometimes you really need to play with the softness, not make your edges so harsh. And really, I think I talk about this over and over again, but when it comes to realism, if you can figure out a way to kind of tackle the middle grounds, the the midtones, like really play into the midtones and only use like high saturations, high contrast, high really color, anything sparingly, really sparingly. Try to get to the middle of everything and you're going to get closer, including blurriness and all of that. And you're going to get closer to something that looks more realistic. And one of the reasons why is because we are constantly moving. We are not still photographs. So when you're watching someone walk around, you're kind of seeing everyone in a blur. And even when someone is standing still, they're still breathing, they're still blinking, they're chewing, they're, making weird facial expressions like I'm doing right now. Leading into this one's so fun. So this is where we are going to be talking about facial expressions and rendering facial expressions and how to do it in a way that is natural and not too overwhelming or harsh. And one of the great things about playing around with these characters, because they're meant for video games, is to get some really interesting, funny expressions. And they have to use this for the storyline of their video games, right? So as portrait artists, this is going to be fun for us. Normally, okay, so real quick, I paused the natural movements. Think of what you're doing right now watching this video. Where are your hands? Where are your feet? What does your face look like? Are you furrowing your brow? Are you like, tensing your jawline? How do you look? When we are naturally moving, we're like constantly moving. And we have to think about this because we're trying to capture the essence of a real person in a still painting. And sometimes we have to think about those in-between movements more than the photograph or more than like a subject sitting in front of you. Like, what are some of the things that make them look naturally human? And this is really, really hard to do. Okay, so let's talk about it. So if I were painting this woman, some things I would consider is, and I really do love painting facial expressions. And I know a lot of people are like, why do you paint people that look like they're scared? Or because we're not always happy. And it's always, humans are human, and human emotions are absolutely beautiful and interesting to look at. So pausing right now on this sad facial expression, we're able to see how the eyebrows look, the forehead looks when it's crunched together a little bit. Now, keep in mind that when you're painting wrinkles, you're not painting lines, you're actually painting folds. So how a fold of skin is moving away from the light or how it's moving toward the light. And when the folds are pressed together, you're going to get a harsher line. But I never like to paint those as a harsh line, but rather lay two different contrasts next to each other and then round it into the highlight. And so, for example, the folds of the skin are round. And because they're round, you're going to get a gradient from the highest point of the wrinkle to the lowest part of the shadow or where it's curving away from the light. I like to do my wrinkles in 2 steps. So the first one would be at the tail end of my underpainting when I'm kind of rendering the final look of my underpainting before I move on to my portraits. And I like to make the gradients appear smooth and the 2 saturations appear a little bit contrasty, but not too much. It's actually pretty incredible how close in contrast wrinkles are to each other. It's really the highlight that is the most high contrast, I guess. The second part of like painting any kind of wrinkle or folds or anything like that would be in the color glazing, because there are different warmnesses, like warmth strengths and cool strengths of your pigments. So I like to think of shadows as cooler and things that are moving toward the light to be warmer in color. And real quick, this is the example of the teeth. We look at the contrast, or look at the difference between the yellow teeth against the monochromatic grisaille gray background. The teeth look yellow, but when you look at it with the color pigments added to the skin, it doesn't look abnormal. It looks normal. It looks natural. And this is because we have something to compare it to that is similar in warmth and cool tones, right? So we see teeth that are slightly yellow here, but they don't look yellow. They just look normal, right? Okay. Symmetry, we're talking about different symmetry of the face and how it's not completely symmetrical. If we're looking at different facial expressions, sometimes facial expressions, even in fear, surprise, are going to be slightly different on one side of the face than the other, just by how we talk, how we think, just how we react to situations. And as we grow up, we kind of form muscles stronger on one side than the other, which actually does change the shape of our face. These are fun things to pay attention to and to think about when you're looking at your subject, little subtleties that make the person uniquely them. These unique subtleties are really what make your customers extremely happy. I think, in my personal opinion, because they're like, oh my gosh, look at that, really looks like them. Look at that, the way that their eyebrow raises just slightly in that one way, or that look in their eye. Sometimes it's something so subtle that it's hard to put your finger on. And those are just some fun things that as you get more experienced with painting, you're going to see more of. But sometimes I think it's important to point it out to you as someone who does this and thinks about these things, because you may not have thought about them before. And now that you know that this is how I think about things, you will start to do it too. And you're going to start to notice things that I have never seen before. Because the beauty of being an artist is that we're all seeing the same person in a different way. And because of that, we are going to capture them in a different way than any other person. Even if we all paint the same person, we're going to capture them in a completely unique and different way. And that is absolutely incredible. And one thing that makes me so excited about art is one thing that is wonderful to share is that everyone can do the same thing and it will always be different. Okay, so that's the lesson. Hopefully you got a lot out of that, and I will see you in the next lesson. Take care.